Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us at TLD, Teacher Librarian Day, Creating a Learning Oasis. I'm here with a couple of amazing master teachers, Sherrie Galloway and Cynthia Stout. And actually, I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. Sherrie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sherrie Galloway. I was a middle school librarian, and in 2005, I had the honor of attending my first TLD and more about primary sources. And one thing led to another, and I ended up in DC as a teacher in residence, and then stayed on at the library for quite a few years as a contractor working with the TPS program. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share with you some of the things that I've learned. And Cindy, you want to introduce yourself too?
Sure. I'm Cindy Stout, and I was a middle school teacher as well, although I did teach K-16 in my 30-year career. In 1997, I was honored to be chosen in the first class of Library of Congress Fellows. And our charge was to use their 14, count them, 14, I just forgot.
Was it digitized primary sources?
No, 14 collections, sorry.
Oh, collections.
14 collections to write beginning of lessons and so forth. But within years, of course, it burgeoned from way ahead of 14 to how many now, Kyle?
Out of hundreds.
Yeah,
a bunch.
So that was really interesting.
Right. So we're here today to talk a little bit about maps, and we've chosen a number of primary sources, and we're going to go through our thought process and Sherrie's thought process and Cindy's about how they would use this and why they would choose this and things like that. So here you can see the screen right here with one of the first sources that Sherrie has chosen.
This source is this. I'm seeing a couple things on my screen, Kyle. I don't know. Yeah. So the gospel. Better? Yeah. Thank you. The gospel temperance railroad map. This map is talking about prohibition and temperance, which I'm not sure how much our students would know about it, but it was a social movement at the time. And obviously it didn't last for too long, but this map is really it's almost a combination of a game, how you could follow what path you're going to take in life, and then that game of life where you end up. This might be something that would be, depending on your audience, depending on your community, you might feel comfortable using it or not. One of the things that jumped out at me was the root word of hibit. We talk about prohibit, to prohibit something, or prohibition, exhibit and inhibit. So I think using those root words would be interesting in comparing that with temperance. But if we have a chance, Kyle, could we zoom in a little bit on the map so that you can see a little bit about what's there? Yeah. So it starts out at the very beginning with your decision of Decisionville on the far left. And so that's where you make the decision of what you want to do with your life. If you want to follow the south lower route with anger and recklessness, or you can follow the top route, which would be prayerful. Or you can kind of pick the middle road, and then you've got some branches and choices that you can make along the way. So with older students, I think this could be a map that would generate a lot of discussion, and maybe it would be something that you don't want to touch with a but I think looking at maps, many people don't think of them showing fictitious places, imaginary places. They think of them as getting from point A to point B. So just thought this one was interesting and kind of something that your students might become engaged with. Cindy, any thoughts about that map?
I had no idea it existed. It's wonderful. And you're right. There's so much you can do with that. And this idea of places that don't really exist. One of the things I love about the early railroad maps the booster maps, where the boosters would put towns along the railroad, and there would be no town there. So these poor guys would take the train and get off thinking there was a town, and it was like a sign with a name on it.
So take a look at this. We'll put this in the resources. You can take a look and see what you think. And again, vocabulary, it could be a really good activity for that. The second one that I thought I'd highlight is called historical geography. And again, this one does show the United States, but it shows it from a different point of view. And talking about bias and point of view and perspective is really important for us to have our students think about who created this, what was their purpose, who was the audience for these maps. So this one across the north, it starts with zooming in a little bit where it says God's blessing liberty, and it's based on the Bible. And if we scroll over to the right a little bit, you can see that where that Bible is where, and go just over a little bit more, that's where Plymouth Rock, the original pilgrims arrived. When we look at the lower section, we have another ship that's coming in, apparently maybe to Jamestown, or looking at the slave ships. And this one refers to God's curse and slavery. And there's all this fine print, these arrows that are pointed there that talk about the Dred Scott decision, the Kansas-Nebraska bill, the fugitive slave law, and all of these things that happened over time and how they affected that. If you go to the very left of that God's curse liberty, it ends up in a place that's called Hades, Texas. Now I have to laugh because that's where my husband is from. It's not Hades, but he's from West Texas. And so I always had to point that out to him. But again, the vocabulary, looking at the laws that happened across that time period, and then across the top, the vocabulary that's obedience to law, intelligence, happiness, faith, hope, peace. All of that is leading to immortality at the far end. So again, this is another map that, depending on your audience, depending on your community, depending on your grade level, you might choose to not use this. But again, it's another example that a map isn't necessarily showing you how to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of context here. There's a lot of bias and point of view. And then at the bottom is a very detailed narrative where they're explaining where they came up with all of these theories. So again, you have some context that might help your students analyze this. I don't know if this is one you've seen before either, Cindy?
I have seen this one. I would use this with the older kids, and in today's world, to look at the vocabulary, look at this map, and then talk about how we view today in our country, and using this as like a starting off point. And actually maybe kids could start with just a US map of states and draw their own arrows
and looking at those laws that were passed along the way. I mean, I think you could even look in different parts of the world, look at historically what happened in Russia, and might help us understand what's happening today in Russia, or other parts, Middle East, looking at how history has built itself and how we have a perspective of what's happening in that part of the world or that part of the country. Again, it's a unique map. It's not your traditional map. And so I wanted to point that one out. The third map that I had for you today, I'll just give you a little background story. When I find these maps, I try I have a master list that when I come across things, it's like, oh, I've got to save that because I can't remember what it's called or a term. To find historical geography, I tried a whole lot of terms, and then I had to go find my odd map list and find the exact title. So just a word to the wise, if you want to, if you come across things in the Library of Congress, have a file or someplace, some way that you can keep track to find them later, because it makes you crazy if you don't. So this map, the reason I found it was I was doing I was reading a book called City of Gold by Will Hobbs. And they were talking about the main character and where he lived. And he lived near Durango in the Animas Valley. And then he was going by foot over to Telluride. And so I thought, well, if I could find a map of that time period and see what kind of roads there were, how did they actually navigate? And in the book, the main character does actually go over the mountains on a trail on foot. For students who don't live in the Colorado Rockies, they might not understand that depending on the time of year, you can have snow all year long. And so this character encountered snow and worried about avalanches and all those kinds of things, even though it wasn't wintertime when he left his home, and it wasn't really wintertime when he got to Telluride. So understanding that about the altitude and all that. The other thing that I found were some maps that were from the Sanborn fire insurance maps. And I think that was the second one that I gave you. I don't know if you had that one up, but it actually had maps of the mines. And in the book, the main character, I won't give too much of it away, but he's going up to the mines to try to find his mules that have been stolen. And so these are the fire insurance maps and the layout of the actual mine. So and it was kind of like, oh my gosh, of course there would be insurance for these mines, and they would document these with these fire insurance maps. These maps, if you're not familiar with the Sanborn fire insurance maps, they were updated every 10 years, and they would document what the buildings were made out of, where they were located, how you got to them, where the roads were, so that if there was some catastrophe, then that would help them determine how much they would have to pay for their fire insurance. But the details over 10 years, every 10 years, if it's updated, then it would be changed. And so if the buildings were originally built out of adobe, and then later they were made out of brick, or they were changed into wood, that would show up on these fire insurance maps. So finding the layout, for me, I'm a visual learner, and I like to read about historical fiction, but to be able to see the layout of these maps and these mines was really, really powerful to me. So then one thing leads to another. And when you're working with historical fiction, other things jump up. So when I'm reading a book, and I've got my book here, I don't know, you can see it with this background, but I have all these sticky notes stuck in the book of things that I thought I could maybe find. And so I put them together on the TPS network in an album. And this is an album of all of the things that I was able to find that fit this book. Now, the book is about the brothers, and they end up encountering bank robbers. And the bank robbers that they encounter are famous, and we'll see that a little bit longer. But this is one of the spires that he sees Lizardhead pass. And he talks about noticing that when he's hiking through this drugstore in Telluride. I never would have known it, but in the details of the bibliographic record, it happens to mention that there was a famous bank robbery that happened to take place, because that was the bank, even though now it's a drugstore. And then how the mining process worked, how they would bring them down from the mountains, and they had the engineering of building these roads on these steep embankments. So you can see some of the roads and how they're shored up, and they could cave in and all of that. And then there was a famous photograph of the Wild Bunch, which was part of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. These photographs were in the library's collection, but they didn't have this famous photo of the Wild Bunch. But I was able to find it at the Smithsonian. So I have a link here in the set. But what happened with this, yeah, right above Butch Cassidy, I don't know if you can click on that, but if that'll open. But this was a photograph of the bunch, the gang, and it's famous. If you ever saw the movie Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, they thought this would just be a fun way to document who they were. They were all dressed up and going out on the town, but they had no concept of the technology at the time. That photograph, they didn't just own the photograph. Someone else got the negative, and that negative went to the newspaper, and all of a sudden their pictures were all over town, all over the country as bank robbers, and it led to them being captured. But they didn't realize how that technology was going to be used and how it ended up becoming part of their downfall. Another interesting piece that was part of this set was I found a newspaper article that described a fire at one of the mines. And it was a Chronicling America article. And it went into detail about a fire that happened at the mine, which is depicted in the story. And it goes through all of that detail, word for word. So when I finished this set for on the network, I shared it with the author, Will Hobbs. And he wrote back to me and said, oh my gosh, that's the exact newspaper article that I referenced when I wrote that section, that chapter in the book. And he was thrilled with all of the resources that I found, many of which he was familiar with, but many that he wasn't. And he was really pleased to see what kinds of details I found and then the suggestions that I had. With each of these items, there are suggestions of how you can use them in the classroom as you're teaching the novel or as students are reading the book. So this album, even though it's part of the network, if you're not part of the network, you can still access this album. Kyle, you might want to tell a little bit more about how that works.
Sure, yeah. If you're not a part of the network, the main thing is to grab or to have somebody grab that copy shareable URL. And if you're part of the network, this is how you would share it out. Just this right here, copy shareable URL, and I'll show you real quick how it looks. This is probably what you sent Will Hobbs, huh?
Right.
So yeah, the TPS Teachers Network is another great place to find resources and strategies that might inspire you to use in your own classroom too, and definitely check it out. There's a session called the TPS Teachers Network, also recorded, so feel free to check that out for more information about that.
So the nice thing about this is to have it all in one album, especially for me. If I'm going to be sharing this with teachers, I can connect them to this link, and they'll have access to that all in one set. Instead of me sending each individual link. Every one of those links, I did have suggestions about how you would use it in the classroom. I'm not sure if that actually shows up, Kyle, in the set when we send it, or if it ends up.
It should be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So when I'm watching TV or I'm reading a book or whatever, I'm constantly taking little notes and going, I got to go look that up and see what I can find at the Library of Congress. Occasionally you'll hit a jackpot and you'll find amazing resources. Sometimes you hit a bit of a dead end. And in that case, you have to be creative, try different terms, but you might not think that you would find maps to go with a lot of the topics that you're doing, but I find that I'm pleasantly surprised with what kinds of maps that I'm able to uncover and figure out a way to connect that with the lessons that I'm teaching, even if it doesn't have anything to do with geography. Cindy, other comments about maps or how you use them?
Just that this is awesome. My two favorite maps are the panoramics and Sanborns. And those are the ones I just love to go to and look through and play with. So they're amazing maps.
And I like to find maps of the same location, but over time.
Right.
for those of you from Colorado, we have some early ones with the Colorado Territory that hardly have any towns on them. And then we have some with a few little towns and then more towns. And so to look at that over time can be a really powerful example as well. So
I was just thinking about that one map about, I think it's the Centennial, and it's a vacation town in the Rockies, and it has like steamboats going in places and huge lakes, and you're just like, that's not Colorado.
Truth in advertising, right? Wasn't in effect at that time?
Well, I have a friend that lived in North Carolina, and she started with a panoramic photo. Or a map. She identified a church. She was able to go out to the Habs Hair and find the church. Then she went on to the Federal Writers Project and found someone who was talking about the church that had been married in the church. So her kids could do a whole lesson from their computers using maps, oral histories, Habs Hair, architecture. So it's really quite exciting. I think you're limited only by your imagination.
And your ability to be tenacious. You know,
Yes.
I think perseverance is something that is important, but if it doesn't come up easily. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning, and one of my colleagues at the library said, the Library of Congress has something to insult everyone. So when you're working with students, you might do a pre-search and save what you find and have students search from there. Maps are fairly safe. I don't think you're going to run into too much, but you may come up with terms or with photographs or depictions, oral histories, could be writing, manuscripts, those kinds of things that you want to be careful with. And so I think in this day and age, it's never inappropriate to make that suggestion that you be aware of that. This is the map collection, the main page for the maps. And you can look at them by collection, or you can look at them and search for key terms. But the bird's eye ones, which is the fourth link over on the top up there where it says, yeah, that one's those are really fun, and there's so many great bird's eye maps. If you happen to find one of your community, it's a gold mine, and you can zoom in and see, you know, what was happening at the time. Sometimes they'll actually have things along the side that will be a key of, you know, what building was there, and these might have been produced by the Chamber of Commerce. It might be that it includes, you know, businesses that have paid to have their business on the map, or it could be something that the city paid for to show, look at how progressive we are. We have all of these churches, we have all of these nice buildings. Maybe you want to come and move here. So they're a fun one, and you can just search bird's eye maps, bird's eye views. Just search that separate collection, which is a fun one.
But there's also something to know about these maps, because most of them were, they hired an artist. And of course, they wanted to show off what they consider the most important part of their town. So sometimes in reality, the river ran north to south, but if they could make it run east to west, it would be more visible, more visually inviting. So you have to keep an eye, because sometimes they change how they looked at the map.
They're not a photographic satellite image exactly how it is. It was more of a collaborative effort between what is ideal and what actually exists.
Well, and these were made by boosters. As you said, look at this, come live in my community. So everything in it was a best foot forward.
Okay, so I don't know. I believe that these are going to be recorded, and you'll have a chance to watch them when it's convenient for you. But we're always available if you have questions, if you want to send us questions or have specific suggestions on how to teach with these resources. One of the tactics that I came up with early on, and it was just an accident, I wanted maps to be big, and I had printed them out on multiple sheets, and I was going to tape them all together to make them big. And my library, a teacher had to leave suddenly, and the class was sent to the library. And so I thought, I'm going to just shuffle all these maps and let the kids pick a piece and analyze a piece, and then see if they can put the puzzle together, which, serendipitously was amazing, because they focused not just looking at the title of the map or the key. They had to really look at the details, and I left the key and the title off so that they didn't have them. And that's worked out to be a really good tactic to work with kids, to make them focus on the details and then try to figure out what they think it is, what was the purpose of the map, who was the audience, who created it, why. And then I give them, after they find the other pieces in their groups, then I give them the key and see if they're right. But
real quick, a helpful tool. Have you seen the new clipping tool on maps at the Library of Congress?
I have not.
This is super new. So let me just share my screen, and would be super helpful for that type of activity if you're wanting to break it up. On all these big files, they've added this clip tool right here. So you can zoom in to whatever section you want to use and click that clip tool, add a little section for whatever you want. And then when you click that image, it gives you a URL, a permanent URL for that. And you can download just this image, which is really helpful, if you're looking for, I just want downtown Denver, or
that's awesome.
Whatever.
That's
constantly
great.
Making upgrades to the library's collections. And it's just so great to see.
Again, using that when you're reading literature about a certain community or town or whatever. We had a teacher one year who came to the library and actually used the Sanborn fire insurance maps to go with To Kill a Mockingbird, and routed out how far it was to the school and where the house was and all those kinds of things. So using that tool would have been a great boon for that piece. Amazing. They're always coming up with something new.
This
right?
is true.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Thanks everybody for joining us. This was a primary source conversation about some maps and how to use maps in the classroom. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of TLD.
Bye.
Bye.